The airplane cabin hummed with the low drone of engines. But to Ethan Caldwell, it was the sound of judgment. He sat in first class, seat 2A, his fingers tracing the edge of his boarding pass, now creased from nervous handling. 7 minutes from now, the entire cabin would be forced to confront their assumptions. But for now, Ethan was just a man trying to breathe through the weight of a stranger's stare. At 38, Ethan was no stranger to scrutiny. His sharp jawline and polished appearance, dark hair swept back. Navy blazer pressed crisp, made him look like he belonged in first class. But the flight attendant, a woman with a tight blonde bun and a name tag reading Claire, had been watching him since he boarded American Airlines Flight 214 from Chicago to San Francisco. Her eyes lingered too long, her smile too thin, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle she didn't like. Ethan shifted in his seat, glancing at the empty one beside him, reserved for his partner, Ryan, who was still stuck at the gate, dealing with a delayed connection. Claire approached, her heels clicking sharply on the cabin floor. "Sir," she said, her voice clipped, "I need to see your boarding pass again." Ethan's stomach tightened. He handed it over, his fingers steady despite the heat rising in his chest. She studied it, her lips pursing. "This doesn't add up," she muttered, loud enough for the passengers in 1A and 1B to glance over. "I'm going to need you to step to the back of the plane." Ethan's heart pounded. "I'm sorry. What's the issue?" His voice was calm, but inside, he was already bracing for the worst. He'd been here before, not on a plane, but in small towns, in bars, in moments when someone decided he didn't fit. Growing up gay in rural Indiana had taught him to read the signs, the narrowed eyes, the subtle shift in tone. Claire's accusation wasn't just about a boarding pass. It was about him. "I don't have time to explain," Claire said, her voice rising. "You need to move. Now." The passengers around them stirred, their whispers like static in the air. Ethan's face burned, but he stood, grabbing his carry-on. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. As he walked down the aisle, heads turned, eyes judging, he was a spectacle now, a problem to be solved. In the galley at the back, Claire crossed her arms. "This ticket was flagged," she said, holding up his boarding pass like evidence. "It's not in the system. Did you think you could just sneak into first class?" Her words were sharp, each one a jab. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't just fighting for his seat, he was fighting for his dignity. Before he could speak, a voice cut through the tension. "Claire, what's going on?" It was another flight attendant, older, with kind eyes and a name tag reading Margaret. She glanced at Ethan, then at Claire, her brow furrowing. "This gentleman was in 2A. Correct. I checked him in myself." Claire's confidence faltered, but she doubled down. "The system says his ticket isn't valid. He's not supposed to be here." Margaret's eyes softened as she looked at Ethan. "Let me see that boarding pass," she said gently. Ethan handed it over, his hands trembling now. Margaret scanned it with a handheld device, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed. "Claire, this is a glitch. His ticket is fine. He's exactly where he's supposed to be." The air in the galley shifted. Claire's face flushed, her lips parting as if to argue. But Margaret held up a hand. "Let's get him back to his seat," she said firmly. As Ethan followed her back to first class, the whispers grew louder. He felt exposed, raw, like a wound laid bare. But Margaret walked beside him, her presence a quiet shield. When he sat down, the man in 1A, a silver-haired businessman, leaned over. "That was uncalled for," he said, his voice low but firm. "You okay?" Ethan nodded, but his throat was tight. He wasn't okay, not yet. He glanced at his phone, where a text from Ryan glowed. Just boarded. Be there in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. 2 minutes until Ryan would walk down that aisle, his broad shoulders filling the space, his easy grin cutting through the tension. Ethan clung to that thought, a lifeline in the storm. But the storm wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ryan Harper, 39, was the kind of man who could light up a room or burn it down, depending on the day. His tousled brown hair and worn leather jacket gave him a rugged charm. But it was his eyes deep hazel, always searching, that made Ethan fall for him 6 years ago. They'd met at a San Francisco bookstore, arguing over the last copy of The Great Gatsby. Ryan had won the book, but given Ethan his number instead. Now, as Ryan hurried through the airport, his boots echoing on the terminal floor, he was running late for a flight that was about to change everything. He boarded just as the cabin doors were closing, his carry-on slung over one shoulder. The moment he stepped into first class, he saw Ethan's face pale, tense, his fingers gripping the armrest. Ryan's heart sank. He knew that look. He'd seen it when they were heckled at a county fair, when a landlord lost their application, when the world reminded them it wasn't always kind. He dropped into seat 2B, his hand finding Ethan's immediately. What happened? He asked, his voice low, urgent. Ethan recounted the incident in clipped sentences, his voice shaking with restrained anger. Ryan's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing. She accused you of stealing a seat, he said, loud enough for Claire, now passing by with a beverage cart, to hear. She froze, her eyes darting to them, then away. Ryan leaned closer to Ethan, his voice dropping to a whisper. We're not letting this go. Ethan squeezed his hand. Let's just get through the flight, he murmured. But Ryan wasn't built for letting things go. He was a journalist, used to digging for truth. And this wasn't just about a seat, it was about Ethan being singled out, humiliated. Ryan's mind raced, piecing together a plan. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to make this right. As the plane climbed into the sky, the cabin settled into a tense quiet. Claire avoided their row, her movements stiff. Margaret, however, stopped by with 2 glasses of wine. On the house, she said with a warm smile. I'm sorry about earlier. That shouldn't have happened. Ethan nodded, grateful, but the knot in his chest didn't loosen. He looked at Ryan, whose eyes were fixed on Claire, calculating. The businessman in 1A turned again. You two together? He asked, his tone curious but kind. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Good, the man said, smiling faintly. You look like you've got each other's backs. It was a small gesture, but it landed like a bomb on Ethan's frayed nerves. Ryan leaned back, his mind still working. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. 7 minutes from now, the cabin would shift again. And this time, it wouldn't be Ethan walking away humiliated. It would be Claire, and everyone who'd judged too quickly, facing the truth. The plane leveled off at 35,000 feet, but the air in first class felt heavier than ever. Ethan stared out the window, the clouds below a swirling white sea, trying to anchor himself in their calm. Ryan's hand, warm and steady on his, was the only thing keeping him from unraveling completely. Ryan, meanwhile, was a live wire. His journalist instincts kicked in, sharp and unrelenting. He'd spent years exposing corruption, from small-town officials to corporate cover-ups. And he knew a story when he saw one. Claire's accusation wasn't just a mistake, it was a symptom of something deeper, something uglier. He glanced at her as she moved through the cabin, her smile forced as she served drinks to the passengers in row 3. She was avoiding their row, but Ryan wasn't about to let her off that easily. Hey, he whispered to Ethan, his voice low but intense. We need to talk to Margaret. She knows something's off. Ethan turned, his dark eyes searching Ryan's face. What are you planning? He asked, wary but trusting. Ryan's grin was sharp, almost predatory. I'm planning to make sure everyone on this plane knows what happened. And why? Ethan hesitated. I just want to get to San Francisco without more drama. But even as he said it, he knew Ryan was right. This wasn't just about them, it was about every person who'd ever been singled out, made to feel less than. Ethan had spent his life swallowing those moments. But Ryan never did. It was one of the things Ethan loved most about him, and one of the things that scared him. Ryan squeezed his hand. Trust me, he said. We're not starting a fight. We're finishing one. Ethan nodded, a flicker of resolve sparking in his chest. He wasn't alone in this. Not with Ryan by his side. Ryan caught Margaret's eye as she passed by, her tray of coffee cups clinking softly. Excuse me, he said, his voice polite but firm. Can we talk for a second? Margaret paused, her expression warm but cautious. Of course, she said, stepping closer. Ryan leaned in, keeping his voice low. What happened with Ethan earlier, it wasn't just a glitch, was it? Margaret's face tightened, a flash of guilt crossing her eyes. It was a system error, she said, but her tone lacked conviction. Ryan pressed gently. Margaret, I'm a journalist. I know when someone's holding back. Ethan didn't deserve that. And you know it. She glanced at Claire, who was now at the front of the cabin, then back at Ryan. It's not my place to say, she murmured. But Claire's been under pressure. New management. New protocols. She's been flagging tickets all week. But this one, she trailed off, shaking her head. Ethan's voice was quiet but steady. She didn't just flag my ticket. She humiliated me in front of everyone. Margaret's eyes softened, and she nodded. I know. I'm sorry. I'll talk to her. But Ryan wasn't satisfied. Talking's not enough, he said. People need to know why this happened, and they need to hear it from her. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. Give me a minute, she said, and walked toward the galley. Ethan turned to Ryan, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing? You're going to get us kicked off. Ryan's eyes softened, but his resolve didn't waver. No one's kicking us off. We're first class. Babe, we paid for these seats, and we're staying in them. The cabin was quiet now, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop. The businessman in 1A, who'd introduced himself as Tom, leaned over again. You boys stirring up trouble? He asked, a playful glint in his eye. Ryan grinned. Just making sure the truth gets a seat, too. Tom chuckled, but his expression grew serious. I saw what happened. That wasn't right. You need backup. I'm here. Ethan's chest warmed at the unexpected ally. Thanks, he said softly. Tom nodded, then turned back to his laptop. But his presence felt like a small victory. Ryan, meanwhile, was already thinking 3 steps ahead. He pulled out his phone, opening the Notes app. I'm drafting something, he said to Ethan. A statement. If Claire won't own this, we'll make sure the story gets out. Ethan's stomach churned. You're not posting this online, are you? Ryan shook his head. Not yet. But if this airline doesn't make it right, they'll wish they had. Ethan wanted to argue, to pull Ryan back from the edge. But he couldn't. Ryan's fire was what had carried them through so many battles against disapproving families, against a world that sometimes refused to see them. He trusted Ryan, even when it scared him. Margaret returned, her expression grim. Claire's been spoken to, she said. She's rattled. But she's not ready to admit she was wrong. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Then we'll help her get there. Margaret sighed, glancing around the cabin. Be careful, she said. This is a long flight, and tempers are high. As she walked away, Ryan turned to Ethan. 7 minutes, he said, his voice low and certain. In 7 minutes. This cabin's going to be different. You with me? Ethan's heart raced, but he nodded. Always. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Ryan typed furiously on his phone, crafting a message that was equal parts truth and fire. Ethan watched him, torn between fear and admiration. Ryan wasn't just fighting for them, was fighting for everyone who'd ever been misjudged, dismissed, or pushed aside. And Ethan, despite the knot in his chest, was ready to stand with him. Claire reappeared, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She stopped at their row, her voice barely audible. I need to speak with you both, she said. Ethan's pulse spiked, but Ryan's hand on his was steady, grounding. This was the moment everything would shift. Claire stood at the edge of their row, her posture rigid, her eyes flickering between Ethan and Ryan. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the hum of the engines the only sound breaking the silence. Ethan felt every pair of eyes in first class on them, the weight of their curiosity pressing against his skin. I owe you an apology, Claire began, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. I made a mistake with your ticket, Mr. Caldwell. It was a system error, and I handled it poorly. Her words were rehearsed, mechanical, but the flush on her cheeks betrayed her discomfort. Ethan stared at her, searching for sincerity, but all he saw was a woman trying to save face. Ryan leaned forward, his voice calm but razor-sharp. A mistake, he said. You didn't just check a ticket, Claire. You accused my partner of stealing a seat in front of everyone. You humiliated him. Why? The question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Claire's mouth opened, then closed, her hands twisting together. Ethan's heart pounded, but he spoke before he could stop himself. Was it because I'm gay? His voice was steady, though his hands shook in his lap. The words landed like a thunderclap, and the cabin went still. The woman in 3C, who'd been scrolling on her phone, looked up. Tom in 1A turned fully in his seat, his eyes locked on Claire. Claire's face reddened further. No, she said quickly. That's not, it was just the ticket. The system flagged it. But her voice wavered, and Ethan saw a flicker of doubt, the crack in her armor. Ryan didn't let up. Then why didn't you check the system quietly? Why make a scene? You singled him out. You made him walk to the back like he'd done something wrong. Margaret appeared behind Claire, her presence calm but firm. Claire, she said softly, tell them the truth. Claire's eyes darted to Margaret, then back to Ethan and Ryan. For a moment, it seemed she might bolt, but then her shoulders slumped. I was wrong, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw you, Mr. Caldwell. And, I don't know. I made assumptions. I'm sorry. The admission was small, but it hit Ethan like a wave. Assumptions. That word carried a lifetime of slights, of moments when he'd been judged for who he was, not what he'd done. He wanted to be angry, to let the hurt spill out. But instead, he felt a strange relief. She'd said it, out loud, in front of everyone. Ryan wasn't done. Assumptions about what? He pressed, his voice low but relentless. That he didn't belong here. That he didn't deserve his seat. Claire flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor. I don't know, she mumbled. I messed up. The cabin was no longer silent. Whispers rippled through the rows. Passengers leaning toward each other, piecing together the story. Tom spoke up, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "You messed up. All right," he said. "You owe this man more than an apology. You owe him respect." The woman in 3C nodded, her expression somber. "That was unfair," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of its own. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. These strangers, who'd watched him be humiliated, were now standing up for him. It wasn't just about the seat Anna Maria, it was about something bigger, something human. Ryan's hand tightened on his. A silent reminder, we're in this together. Margaret stepped forward, her voice gentle but authoritative. "Claire, why don't you take a break?" It wasn't a suggestion. Claire nodded, her face a mask of shame, and slipped into the galley. Margaret turned to Ethan and Ryan. "I'm truly sorry," she said. "This isn't how we do things. I'll make sure it's addressed." Ethan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Ryan, however, wasn't ready to let it go. "It's not just about addressing it," he said. "It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. To anyone." Margaret met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I hear you," she said. "I'll escalate this to the captain." As Margaret walked away, the cabin seemed to exhale. The tension was still there, but it was different now, less oppressive, more like a shared reckoning. Ethan looked at Ryan, whose eyes were still burning with purpose. "You didn't have to go that hard," Ethan said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Ryan grinned back, but his voice was serious. "Yeah, I did. For you. For us." Ethan's heart swelled, the weight of the last hour lifting slightly. He leaned his head against Ryan's shoulder, just for a moment, letting the warmth of his partner ground him. The woman in 3C stood, walking over to their row. "I'm Lisa," she said, her voice warm. "I just want to say, I'm sorry you went through that. And I'm glad you spoke up." Ethan managed a nod, his voice still caught in his throat. Ryan answered for him. "Thanks, Lisa. It means a lot." As Lisa returned to her seat, Tom leaned over again. "You two are troublemakers," he said, his grin wide. "I like it." Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. It was the first time he'd felt light since boarding the plane. Ryan pulled out his phone again, his fingers hovering over the screen. "I'm not posting anything yet," he said, reading Ethan's mind. "But I'm keeping notes. If this airline doesn't follow through, they're going to hear from me." Ethan nodded, trusting Ryan's judgment. He knew Ryan's articles had taken down bigger targets than a single flight attendant. The plane droned on, the clouds outside an endless blur. But inside, something had shifted. Ethan felt it in the glances from other passengers, not judgment now, but curiosity, maybe even respect. 7 minutes ago, he'd been a man accused, a man diminished. Now, he was a man seen. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and professional, announcing they'd hit cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign was off. Ethan barely registered it, his mind still replaying Claire's apology, the weight of her words settling like dust after a storm. Ryan, beside him, was quieter now, his intensity simmering beneath the surface as he sipped the wine Margaret had brought earlier. Ethan glanced at him, catching the way Ryan's jaw clenched, his eyes distant. "You okay?" Ethan asked softly. Ryan turned, his hazel eyes softening. "I'm supposed to ask you that," he said, his voice low. I hate that you had to go through that. Alone." Ethan shook his head. "I wasn't alone. You were here, even if you were late." Ryan chuckled, the sound easing the tension in Ethan's chest. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the plane wrapping around them. Ethan's thoughts drifted to their life in San Francisco, their small apartment overlooking the bay. The Sunday mornings spent tangled in bed. The fights that ended in laughter. They'd built something solid. Something real. But moments like this reminded him how fragile it could feel in a world that didn't always understand. Margaret returned. Her expression warmer now. A small notebook in her hand. "I spoke to the captain," she said, crouching slightly to meet their eyes. "He's aware of the situation, and he'd like to speak with you both when we land. The airline will follow up. I promise." Ethan nodded, grateful for her effort, but Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Follow up how?" he asked. "A form letter. A free drink voucher." Margaret smiled, undeterred by his edge. "More than that," she said. "The captain's a good man. He doesn't tolerate this kind of thing." Ryan leaned back, considering her words. "Good," he said finally. "Because neither do we." As Margaret walked away, Ethan felt a spark of hope. Maybe this wouldn't just fade into another bad memory. Maybe, with Ryan's fire and the unexpected support of strangers like Tom and Lisa, they could push for something more accountability. Change. He glanced at Ryan, who was watching him with a look that said, "We've got this." The cabin had settled into a quieter rhythm now. Passengers engrossed in their books, screens, or naps. But the energy in first class was different, charged with the aftermath of Claire's apology. Ethan noticed the small glances, the way people seemed to see him now not as a problem, but as a person. It was subtle, but it mattered. Tom, the businessman in 1A, turned to them again. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "my son's gay. He's about your age. Lives in New York with his husband. What happened to you? It makes me think about what he might face out there." Ethan's chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with connection. "That's why we spoke up," he said quietly. "For him, too." Tom nodded, his eyes glistening slightly. "You're good men," he said, then turned back to his laptop, as if the moment had been too raw to linger on. Ethan looked at Ryan, who gave him a small, proud smile. "See," Ryan whispered, "we're not just fighting for us." The flight continued, the hours stretching out as the plane cut through the night sky. Ethan tried to focus on the in-flight movie, but his mind kept circling back to Claire. Her apology had been a start, but it wasn't enough. He wanted to know why she'd singled him out. What assumptions had driven her to act so quickly, so publicly? He wasn't sure if he'd ever get those answers, but he knew Ryan wouldn't stop until they did. Ryan, meanwhile, was sketching out a plan in his head. He'd seen how moments like this could ripple, how a single story could spark change. He thought about the article he could write, not just about Ethan's humiliation, but about the broader issue, the way systems and people failed those who didn't fit their narrow mold. He glanced at Ethan, who was staring out the window again, and made a silent promise. This won't be for nothing. Lisa, the woman in 3C, approached again, this time with a small notebook of her own. "I'm a lawyer," she said, her voice steady. "If you decide to take this further, I can help. What happened to you, it's not just personal. It's systemic." Ethan blinked, surprised by her offer. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. We'll think about it." Ryan's eyes lit up. "We will," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Lisa smiled, handing them a business card. "Call me," she said, then returned to her seat. Ethan looked at the card, then at Ryan. "You're already planning the next step, aren't you?" he said, half exasperated, half amused. Ryan grinned. "Always." But his expression softened as he leaned closer. But only if you're in. This is your story, too. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. I'm in, he said. For us. For everyone. The plane dipped slightly, a reminder of their place in the sky, suspended between where they'd been and where they were going. Ethan felt a shift, not just in the cabin, but in himself. He wasn't just the man who'd been accused. He was the man who'd stood up, who'd been seen, who'd been heard. And with Ryan beside him, he knew they were just getting started. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight stretched into its third hour, casting a soft glow over the rows of passengers. Ethan leaned his head against the window, the cool glass grounding him as he processed the whirlwind of the last hour. Ryan's hand rested on his knee, a quiet anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Claire hadn't returned to first class since her apology, and Ethan was grateful for the reprieve. Her absence gave him space to breathe, to think about what came next. He glanced at Ryan, who was scrolling through his phone, drafting notes with a focus Ethan knew all too well. Ryan was already building a case, piecing together a story that could hold the airline accountable. But Ethan wasn't sure he was ready for that fight, not yet. You're quiet, Ryan said, glancing over. His voice was soft, but there was a question in it. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm just tired, he said. Not of you, or this. Just of having to prove I belong. Ryan's eyes darkened with understanding. He set his phone down, turning fully to face Ethan. You shouldn't have to, he said. And I'm going to make sure you don't have to again. Ethan managed a small smile. You can't fix the world. Ryan's grin was fierce. Watch me try. They both laughed, the sound easing the knot in Ethan's chest. But beneath the laughter, Ethan felt the weight of what had happened and what it meant. This wasn't just about a flight attendant's mistake. It was about the assumptions that had made it possible, the biases that lingered in glances and silences. Margaret passed by again, her smile warm but tinged with concern. You two doing okay? She asked. Ethan nodded, but Ryan spoke up. We're okay, but we're not done. What's the plan when we land? Margaret hesitated, then leaned in. The captain wants to meet you at the gate. He'll have a representative from the airline there to discuss next steps. Ryan's eyes lit up, but Ethan felt a flicker of unease. Next steps? He asked. Like what? Margaret's expression was reassuring. They'll want to hear your side. Make this right. The captain's serious about it. He's been with the airline 30 years. She doesn't let things like this slide. Ethan nodded, but his mind was racing. He didn't want a meeting, or a formal complaint, or more attention. He just wanted to get home, to curl up with Ryan on their couch and forget this day. But he knew Ryan was right. This wasn't just about them. It was about the next person who'd be singled out, the next person who'd feel that sting of not belonging. Tom, the businessman in 1A, overheard their conversation and turned to them. You're meeting the captain? He asked. Ryan nodded. Good, Tom said. Make sure they know this isn't just a one-off. My son has dealt with this kind of thing too many times. It's not right. Ethan's throat tightened at the mention of Tom's son again. It was a reminder that this fight wasn't just theirs, it was shared, a thread connecting them to others. Lisa, the lawyer in 3C, joined the conversation, her voice calm but firm. If you need a witness. I saw everything, she said, and I meant what I said about helping. This kind of thing, it's not just personal. It's a pattern. Ryan's eyes gleamed with possibility. A pattern, he repeated. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Ethan listened as Ryan and Lisa talked, their voices low but intense, mapping out strategies, complaints, media, maybe even a lawsuit. Ethan felt a mix of pride and fear. Ryan was a force, unstoppable when he believed in something. But Ethan wasn't sure he had the same fire. He'd spent so much of his life trying to blend in, to avoid making waves. This standing up, demanding change was new, and it scared him. Ryan seemed to sense his hesitation. He reached for Ethan's hand, his thumb brushing over his knuckles. "We don't have to decide anything now," he said softly. "But we're not letting this go. Not this time." Ethan nodded, drawing strength from Ryan's certainty. "Okay," he said. "Let's do this." The plane began its descent, the lights of San Francisco twinkling below like a promise. Ethan felt a surge of relief at the thought of home, but also a new resolve. He wasn't just the man who'd been accused anymore. He was the man who'd stood up, who'd been seen, who'd been heard. And with Ryan, Tom, Lisa, and even Margaret in his corner, he felt something he hadn't felt in hours: hope. As the landing gear rumbled beneath them, Ryan leaned over, his voice a whisper. "We're going to make this right," he said. "Not just for us. For everyone." Ethan squeezed his hand, his heart steady for the first time all flight. "I know," he said. "And I'm with you." The plane touched down, the cabin erupting in the usual flurry of activity, passengers unbuckling, grabbing bags, checking phones. But for Ethan and Ryan, the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The plane taxied to the gate, the cabin buzzing with the restless energy of arrival. Ethan's heart raced, not from the landing, but from what awaited them outside. Ryan was already gathering their bags, his movements quick and purposeful, like a man preparing for battle. Ethan envied his clarity, his unyielding drive. For Ethan, the path forward felt murkier, a tangle of anger, hope, and fear. As passengers began to disembark, Margaret approached, her expression calm but resolute. "The captain's waiting at the gate," she said. "There's a private area where you can talk. I'll walk you there." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. Ryan gave her a grateful smile. "Thanks, Margaret, for everything." They stepped off the plane into the bright, sterile light of San Francisco International Airport. The terminal was a blur of motion, people rushing to connections, families reuniting, announcements crackling overhead. But for Ethan, the world narrowed to the small group waiting near the gate: a tall man in a captain's uniform, a woman in a crisp airline blazer, and Claire, standing slightly apart, her face pale and drawn. The captain, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with graying hair, stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Harper," he said, his voice steady. "I'm Captain Reynolds. This is MS. Carter, our passenger relations manager. We'd like to hear what happened." His eyes were kind but serious, and Ethan felt a flicker of reassurance. This wasn't just a formality. Ryan spoke first, his voice clear and measured. Ethan was accused of stealing his seat in first class, he said. He was humiliated in front of the entire cabin, forced to walk to the back like a criminal. It wasn't just a mistake, it was personal. Ethan watched as Captain Reynolds' jaw tightened, his gaze shifting to Claire, who looked at the floor. "MS. Carter," the manager, nodded, her expression professional but empathetic. "I've reviewed the incident report," she said. "There was a system glitch, but that doesn't excuse how it was handled. We take this seriously." Ethan's stomach churned. Her words were polished, practiced, but he wanted more than promises. He wanted accountability. Claire spoke up, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes flickering to Ethan, then away. "I didn't mean to. I just reacted." Ethan's chest tightened. Her apology felt like a half-truth, a shield against consequences. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Reacted to what? He asked. To a gay man in first class. To someone you decided didn't belong. Claire flinched, her hands twisting together. It wasn't like that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Captain Reynolds stepped in. Claire, you're on leave until we investigate further, he said, his tone firm. This isn't how we treat passengers. Claire nodded, her eyes glistening, and slipped away into the crowd. Ms. Carter turned to Ethan. Mr. Caldwell, I'd like to hear from you, she said. What do you need to make this right? Ethan froze, the question catching him off guard. He hadn't thought about what he needed, just about surviving the moment. He glanced at Ryan, who gave him a small nod. A silent "You've got this." I need to know this won't happen again, Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. Not to me. Not to anyone. I need you to train your staff better. To check their biases. I need you to mean it. Ms. Carter nodded, scribbling notes. We're revising our training protocols, she said. This incident will be part of that process. Ryan leaned forward. And we want a public statement, he said. Not just an apology to us, but an acknowledgement that this was wrong, that you're taking steps to fix it. Ms. Carter hesitated, then nodded. I'll discuss it with corporate. We'll follow up within the week. As they spoke, Tom and Lisa lingered nearby, their presence a quiet show of support. Tom caught Ethan's eye and gave him a thumbs up, while Lisa handed Ms. Carter her business card. I'm happy to provide a witness statement, she said. This needs to be documented. Ms. Carter nodded, tucking the card into her pocket. The meeting ended with promises of follow-ups and compensation. But Ethan felt drained, the weight of the day pressing down on him. As they walked away, Ryan's arm around his shoulders, he felt a mix of relief and resolve. They'd been heard, but the fight wasn't over. Back at their apartment that night, Ethan sank onto the couch, the familiar comfort of home wrapping around him. Ryan joined him, pulling him close. We did good today, Ryan said, his voice soft but proud. Ethan nodded, his head resting against Ryan's chest. Yeah, he said, but it's not enough. Ryan kissed the top of his head. It's a start, he said, and we're not stopping. Ethan smiled, the warmth of Ryan's words settling into him. They'd face the world together today, and they'd do it again tomorrow. For now, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the bay windows of their San Francisco apartment, painting the hardwood floor in golden streaks. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, his mind still tangled in the events of the flight. Ryan was at the counter, typing furiously on his laptop, his journalist instincts in overdrive. You're writing it, aren't you? Ethan asked, his voice half teasing, half wary. Ryan glanced up, his grin unapologetic. Just notes, he said. For now. But this story's bigger than us. Ethan. People need to hear it. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure he was ready for their lives to become a headline. But he knew Ryan was right. Silence hadn't protected them yesterday, and it wouldn't protect anyone else tomorrow. His phone buzzed. A notification from the airline. Ms. Carter had emailed, reiterating their commitment to follow up and offering compensation, a voucher, and a formal apology letter. Ethan skimmed it, then set his phone down. It's a start, he said, echoing Ryan's words from the night before. But it still felt hollow, like a bandage on a deeper wound. Ryan closed his laptop and joined Ethan at the table, his hand finding Ethan's. I've been thinking, he said. We could reach out to Lisa. She offered to help. If we push, we could make this a case study, force the airline to rethink their training, their culture. Ethan's chest tightened. You mean a lawsuit? He asked, his voice quiet. Ryan shook his head. Not necessarily. But we could work with her to draft something, a proposal. A demand for change. Something public. Ethan hesitated, the weight of exposure pressing down on him. He'd spent so much of his life avoiding attention, blending into the background. But yesterday had changed something in him. He wasn't invisible anymore. And he didn't want to be. Okay, he said finally. Let's do it. But together. Ryan's eyes lit up, and he leaned in, kissing Ethan softly. Always, he said. They spent the day drafting an email to Lisa, outlining what had happened and what they wanted: better training, a public acknowledgement, and a commitment to inclusivity. Lisa responded within the hour, her tone professional but warm. I'm in, she wrote. Let's set up a call. I know a few advocacy groups who'd want to weigh in. By afternoon, they were on a video call with Lisa and a representative from an LGBTQ+ advocacy organization. The conversation was intense, a whirlwind of legal terms and strategic planning. Ethan felt out of his depth, but Ryan was in his element, his voice steady as he recounted the incident. Lisa suggested filing a formal complaint with the airline, backed by witness statements from Tom and Margaret. The advocate proposed a social media campaign to pressure the airline into action. Ethan listened, his resolve growing with every word. This wasn't just about him, Anna Maria, it was about the bigger picture. About making sure no one else felt the way he had in that cabin. By the time the call ended, they had a plan, a complaint, a public letter, and a push for media coverage. Ryan was already drafting the letter, his fingers flying across the keyboard. That evening, as they sat on the couch, Ethan felt a spark of something new: pride. Not just in Ryan, but in himself. He'd stood up, spoken out, and now they were building something that could matter. Ryan looked over, catching his expression. What's that smile for? He asked, his tone teasing. For you, Ethan said. For us. For doing this. Ryan pulled him close, his arms strong and warm. We're just getting started, he said, and Ethan believed him. The week passed in a blur of emails, calls, and drafts. The airline reached out again, this time with a more detailed response, promising a review of their training protocols and a meeting with their diversity team. It wasn't enough, but it was progress. Ryan's letter, co-signed by Lisa and the advocacy group, went viral on social media, shared by thousands, including Tom, who'd become an unexpected ally. Ethan watched the notifications pour in, a mix of support and vitriol. Some called them heroes. Others called them troublemakers. But through it all, Ryan was there, his hand in Ethan's, his fire unwavering. They were fighting, not just for themselves, but for a world where no one had to prove they belonged. 3 months later, Ethan stood at the edge of a small conference room in San Francisco, his palms sweaty as he adjusted his tie. The airline had invited them to a meeting with their leadership team, a follow-up to the viral letter and the growing public pressure. Ryan was beside him, his leather jacket swapped for a blazer, but his eyes still burned with the same fire that had carried them through that flight. The room was filled with executives, their faces a mix of professionalism and unease. Ms. Carter was there, along with Captain Reynolds and a diversity consultant named Dr. Patel. Claire was absent, her investigation still ongoing. But Margaret had sent a supportive email, apologizing again for what had happened. Ethan clutched the folder in his hands, filled with their demands, witness statements, and a proposal for new training protocols. Dr. Patel began the meeting, her voice calm but authoritative. "We've reviewed your complaint and the public response," she said. "We're committed to change. Starting next month, we're rolling out a new inclusivity training program." Informed by this incident, Ethan's heart lifted, but he remained cautious. Promises were easy. Action was harder. Ryan spoke up, his voice steady. "We appreciate that," he said, "but we need more than training. We need accountability publicly. People need to know you're taking this seriously." Ms. Carter nodded. "We're issuing a statement next week, acknowledging the incident and outlining our steps forward. Your input shaped that." Ethan felt a weight lift, but it wasn't enough. He thought of the passengers who'd watched him that day, the ones who'd whispered, the ones who'd stood up. He thought of Tom's son, of Lisa's offer, of the thousands who'd shared their story. This wasn't just about them, it was about everyone who'd ever felt unseen, unworthy. "I want to say something," Ethan said, his voice stronger than he expected. The room turned to him, and he took a breath. "What happened to me wasn't just a glitch. It was a moment where I was made to feel like I didn't belong. I don't want anyone else to feel that, not on your planes. Not anywhere. You have the power to change that." The room was silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. "Dr. Patel nodded, her expression solemn. "You're right," she said, "and we're listening." Ryan reached for Ethan's hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. Ethan felt a surge of pride, not just in Ryan, but in himself. He'd found his voice, and he wasn't letting it go. The meeting ended with commitments to follow through, to include their input in the training, and to monitor progress. It wasn't perfect, but it was a steep, a real one. As they left the building, the San Francisco skyline glittering in the distance, Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. Back home, they stood on their balcony, the bay stretching out before them. Ryan wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders, pulling him close. "We did it," he said, his voice soft but triumphant. Ethan shook his head. "We started it," he corrected. "There's more to do." Ryan grinned, kissing his temple. "Then we'll do it together." Ethan leaned into him, the warmth of Ryan's body grounding him. They'd faced the storm, and they'd come out stronger, not just for themselves, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan thought of the flight, of the 7 minutes that had changed everything. It wasn't just about an apology, it was about a truth laid bare, a fight for dignity, and a love that refused to be silenced. They'd won this round, and they'd keep fighting, hand in hand, for a world where everyone had a seat.